At 76, King Charles finally admitted what millions had suspected for decades, and it shook the monarchy to its core. For most of his life, Charles lived behind a carefully managed image, presented as a dutiful heir destined for greatness. But behind palace walls, a different story unfolded, one built on deception, suppressed emotions, and forbidden love. His confession wasn't just about Camila or Diana, it was about the institution itself, about secrets that could no longer stay hidden. This isn't the tale of a noble king rising. It's the story of betrayal, scandal, and one devastating truth. Charles's story begins in November 1948, when he was born into a family where the crown came before childhood. Unlike other boys, his mother was not simply mum. She was Queen Elizabeth II, a monarch first and a parent second. When she vanished for months on Commonwealth tours, Charles was left in the hands of nannies and guardians who could never fill that gap. His father, Prince Philip, believed in discipline above comfort. Determined to toughen his son, he sent Charles to Gordonstoun, a harsh Scottish boarding school infamous for its unforgiving environment. While other aristocrats may have thrived, Charles suffered. He was mocked as weak, bullied relentlessly, and left to endure nights of isolation. In letters to his family, he described the experience as pure hell. These years shaped him profoundly. Charles learned that emotions had no place in his life. To survive, he built walls around his feelings, projecting an image of restraint and duty. But behind the mask, the need for affection only grew stronger. As he entered adulthood, the world saw a polished prince, refined, cautious, and burdened with responsibility. What they didn't see was a man desperate for connection, someone who longed for love but had been taught it was a weakness. That contradiction would follow him for decades. And when it came time to choose a partner, those wounds would collide with royal expectations in a way that forever altered his destiny. By his 20s, Charles had already developed a reputation as a bachelor with a restless heart. Actresses, aristocrats, and high-profile women passed through his life, but every relationship ended the same way, brief, secretive, and discarded. This wasn't the behavior of a man unsure about love. It was the behavior of someone who knew love wasn't the priority. From the very start, Charles faced a burden few could imagine. He wasn't free to marry whomever he chose. Royal tradition demanded suitability above all, youth, purity, and an impeccable aristocratic background. His uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, acted as both mentor and manipulator, pushing Charles toward finding a perfect bride who could embody monarchy's ideals. By the late 1970s, the pressure was suffocating. Charles had already fallen deeply for Camilla Shand, later Camilla Parker Bowles, but she was deemed unsuitable, too worldly, too experienced, and too unwilling to play the role of a silent royal consort. Against his own heart, Charles drifted from her, only to be steered toward a safer choice. That choice was Lady Diana Spencer. At 19, she was shy, beautiful, and met every requirement the monarchy valued. To the outside world, she was the perfect fairy tale princess. To Charles, she was a solution to a problem he never wanted solved. What the palace celebrated as a triumph of tradition was, in truth, the beginning of tragedy. Because the one thing nobody could change was that Charles's heart was still with Camilla, and soon the world would see the consequences. When Charles proposed to Diana in February 1981, the cracks appeared immediately. During their engagement interview, a reporter asked if they were in love. Diana, glowing and certain, answered, "Of course." Charles hesitated, then delivered the infamous reply, "Whatever in love means." The world brushed it off as awkward humor. But for Diana, it was a warning sign. Just days before their wedding, she discovered a bracelet Charles had commissioned for Camilla. Engraved with the initials G and F, their pet names Gladys and Fred, it was a painful reminder of where his true devotion lay. Diana confronted him, but the monarchy silenced her distress. The wedding would go on. On July 29, 1981, 750 million people around the globe tuned in to watch what was hailed as the wedding of the century. To the cameras, it was a glittering spectacle, a fairy tale come alive. But behind palace walls, it felt more like a funeral procession. Diana later admitted she already knew she was marrying 3 people. The marriage quickly revealed its fractures. Diana was left feeling isolated, while Charles maintained contact with Camilla, often under the guise of friendship. Whispers turned into suspicions, suspicions into evidence. Diana's private agony grew while Charles clung to a relationship he refused to let go of. The monarchy had secured its perfect image, but it had done so by trapping 2 people in a lie. And when that lie began to unravel, it did so publicly, in ways that humiliated not just Charles and Diana, but the monarchy itself. By the mid-1980s, the marriage had become unbearable. Diana, suffocated by betrayal and loneliness, struggled with bulimia and depression. She felt trapped in an arrangement that denied her love while demanding perfection. Charles, meanwhile, grew colder, pouring more of his attention toward Camila. The scandal finally burst into public view with the infamous Camila-gate tapes. In 1993, a secretly recorded late-night phone call between Charles and Camila was leaked. In it, Charles confessed his desire to live inside her trousers, even joking he might like to be reincarnated as her tampon. The press called it Tampon Gate, and the monarchy reeled in embarrassment. For the public, this wasn't just vulgarity. It was confirmation that the fairy tale had been a lie all along. While Diana smiled for cameras, her husband's affections were clearly elsewhere. Newspapers debated whether the monarchy itself could survive such humiliation. Inside the palace, Diana was branded unstable, emotional, and difficult, a convenient way to dismiss the pain she endured. But outside, she grew in popularity. The public sympathized with her struggles, even as she crumbled in private. For Charles, the tapes stripped away the carefully built facade. He could no longer hide behind duty. His obsession with Camila was now undeniable. The scandal made Diana a global icon of sympathy, and Charles a symbol of betrayal. But the worst was still to come, because when Diana finally decided to speak, she exposed truths the monarchy had fought desperately to keep hidden. In 1995, Diana gave a television interview that shattered the monarchy's carefully managed silence. Sitting across from journalist Martin Bashir, she spoke with candor the palace had never anticipated. Her words became historic. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." That single sentence struck deeper than any tabloid scandal. It wasn't rumor. It was Diana herself confirming what the world suspected, that Charles's devotion to Camila had destroyed their marriage. The public's sympathy turned into outrage. Charles's image, already battered by the Camila-gate tapes, crumbled further. Behind the scenes, Queen Elizabeth II had seen enough. In 1992, she had already insisted on their separation. By 1996, the divorce was finalized, ending the facade of unity once and for all. But freedom for Diana came at a cost. Her newfound independence made her even more adored by the public, while Charles was increasingly cast as the villain of her story. Then came the tragedy of 1997. Diana's sudden death in Paris stunned the world. The grief was unlike anything Britain had ever seen. Crowds wept openly, flowers blanketed the gates of Kensington Palace, and the monarchy faced unprecedented fury. Many blamed Charles directly, if not for her death, then for the misery that had driven her there. The fairy tale had ended in catastrophe. Diana was gone, but her shadow grew larger than ever. For Charles, survival meant retreat. For Camila, it meant years hidden in the shadows. But neither intended to stay buried forever. After Diana's death, Charles faced open hostility. Crowds booed him at public events. Newspapers ran letters demanding he never become king. Camila, the woman at the center of it all, was kept hidden away, shielded from cameras as if her very presence could reignite national fury. But Charles was patient. He knew time had a way of softening memory. Slowly, methodically, he reintroduced Camila into public life. First as a quiet companion, then as a trusted partner, until eventually her presence at royal events became impossible to ignore. By 2005, Charles took the ultimate step, marrying Camila in a civil ceremony. Yet even that day carried the weight of Diana's legacy. The palace announced that Camila would never be called queen, only princess consort, when Charles ascended the throne. It was a compromise, a way of acknowledging that the public's loyalty to Diana's memory was still too strong. But Charles had achieved what once seemed impossible, legitimizing his lifelong relationship with Camila. The monarchy that once rejected her now tolerated her, even slowly accepted her. The scandal was not erased, but it was buried beneath carefully managed appearances. Charles's strategy worked. Over time, younger generations grew up with less memory of Diana's heartbreak and more images of Charles and Camila as a stable couple. But while the public forgot, Charles never did. His choices had already carved scars too deep to heal. And when his mother's reign ended, the truth could no longer stay in the shadows. In 2022, Queen Elizabeth II passed away, and Charles finally became king after the longest wait in British history. At his coronation, millions around the world saw Camila crowned beside him. What once seemed unthinkable, Camila as queen, had become reality, but Diana's ghost was everywhere. Documentaries, interviews, and murals kept her memory alive. The public could never fully forget her tears, her words, and the way she had been cast aside. Every triumph Charles celebrated came with whispers of betrayal. Then, at 76, Charles made the admission that confirmed what Britain had always known. Speaking candidly, he acknowledged that his marriage to Diana had never been a fairy tale. His heart had always been with Camila, the institution, the The crown and the weight of duty had forced him into choices that destroyed lives. It was not an apology, a confession that validated everything Diana had once said, that she had been sacrificed to a system that valued image over happiness. With those words, history shifted. The king himself had confirmed the story his critics had told for decades, and in doing so, he sealed his own legacy. Charles would not be remembered as a reformer or a unifier. He would be remembered as the monarch of scandal, the man whose confession proved Diana right, but his admission did more than vindicate her. It forced Britain to confront the uncomfortable truth. The monarchy was built on silence, and Charles had broken it. For William and Harry, Charles's confession was more than history. It was personal. They had lived through their mother's heartbreak, walked behind her coffin, and carried the scars of her absence into adulthood. Now, their father's words confirmed what they had always known. Diana had been right. William, bound to inherit the throne, responded with reserve. His loyalty was to the crown, even if it meant swallowing private pain. Harry, by contrast, tore the wound open. Through interviews and his memoir, he accused the monarchy of never atoning for Diana's suffering. Their paths diverged, but both were shaped by the same truth. Their father's devotion to Camila had defined their childhood. For Charles, the admission carried both liberation and condemnation. On one hand, he no longer lived behind denial. On the other, he had ensured his reign would forever be tied to betrayal. His causes, his environmental campaigns, his charitable work, all faded into the background. History would not remember those achievements. Instead, Charles's legacy became his confession. He was the king who admitted his love for Camilla came at the expense of Diana, his family, and the trust of his people. He had waited longer than any heir to inherit the crown, only to find that his reign would not erase the past. In the end, Charles will not be remembered for sovereignty or stability. He will be remembered for a choice, the woman he could not give up, and the woman the world would never forget.